welcome to Brain Chat. I'm Dr. Mitzi Joy Williams, your board-certified neurologist and MS specialist, and my mission is to engage, educate, and empower those affected by MS to become an active part of their healthcare team. Here on Brain Chat, we'll be discussing all things MS, health and wellness, advocacy, and we'll even throw a little bit of music and music therapy in there as well. Thank you so much for joining us, and stay tuned for the next episode. Hello, hello, hello. Happy Monday, my friends, and welcome to the last Monday of January. Is it? I'm sorry. The first Monday in February. Oh gosh, I'm so confused. I don't even know what day it is. But the first Monday in February, and we're excited to kick off Black History Month with an episode about MS and the Black population. So I'm really, really excited about the guest that I have tonight, and we are going to have an amazing conversation with some super friends and super advocates who I think will provide some information to really help, both people living with MS, their care partners, as well as healthcare providers, right, who want to better understand how MS may be presenting and some of the issues that may be unique to the Black and African American population. You know how we do when we start Brain Chat. You can drop in the chat where you are logging in from. And I'm so appreciative of everyone taking out time on this Monday night to spend some time talking with us and viewing this program. I also want to give a plug for my new book. I just wrote a book called You Can Live Well with MS. And I'm very excited about it to hopefully offer some practical tools for people living with MS because, there are things that you can do to help yourself. And so I want to make sure that information is spread to patients and care partners and everyone in the MS community. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get this party started. All right. So I'm going to introduce my guests, and then we will bring them up to the chat, and then we'll talk a little bit about some of these issues and hear some amazing perspectives. So Damian Washington, I've done a lot of work with Damian. I love working with Damian. He's an actor, comedian, host extraordinaire, and he has his own show called No Stress MS, which is on YouTube, and he's got like a gazillion followers. I don't know how many, but I'm just going to say a gazillion. But he is so candid about his MS experience, and I'm very, very honored to have him with us tonight. And I also have Dr. Maima Akinsanya. She is a board-certified neurologist like myself, and she is in her neuroimmunology fellowship at the NIH, and she's focusing on clinical research and increasing diversity in clinical trials. So very excited to hear her perspective. And last but certainly not least, we have Dawn Morgan, who is an amazing MS advocate. We've got to work together on many projects, including an exciting one coming up that I'm not going to talk about yet because we can't talk about it yet. But she also is the host of a podcast called The Unquiet Mind. So, great resources for you guys to check out, and we will bring everybody up to the chat. Welcome to Brain Chat.
Love
it,
it,
everybody.
Hi, thank you.
Good. Well, I love to have, amazing and vibrant people on Brain Chat because I know we're going to have a good conversation tonight. So y'all ready? All right, let's do it.
Let's go.
So first, before we get into, the meat of the program, I always like for people to tell us kind of how you became a part of the MS community. So we will start with Dr. Akinsanya, and then I would love for Damian and Dawn to share a little bit about their stories, about how they were diagnosed and kind of how they got to the point where they are now, where they're very strong and vocal advocates and, not afraid to talk about their diagnosis and the things that they deal with. So we'll start with you, Dr. Akinsanya.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. My journey with, exploring MS really started in medical school. I was exploring becoming a neurologist, and I knew I was interested in neurology. And one of the rotations that my school had available was with a MS provider. And I didn't really know much about MS, but I wanted, again, to learn more about neurology. So I took the rotation and went in with an open mind, and I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed interacting with the patients. I enjoyed learning about the disease and learning learning about, the different medications that were available to help treat not just the disease itself, but the symptoms associated with the disease. And honestly, it was the patients that really drew me in. I just enjoyed interacting with them and forming a connection with them. So after doing that rotation and really solidifying my desire to become a neurologist, I went into neurology residency, still with an open mind, but just knowing that I had interacted with the MS community more than any other neurologic disorder community. And I was still open to learning more. And in residency, I did my different rotations and learned about other disorders like Parkinson's and stroke, but I just kept coming back to the neuroimmunological disorders and realized that even in the other subspecialties, it was the inflammatory disorders that really drew my interest and really piqued my curiosity. So that's how I decided, you know what? MS is what's for me. So that's how I decided to pursue a fellowship in neuroimmunologic disorders, including MS. And I'm really happy. I find it really, really intriguing. Again, I still love the patients, and I'm really passionate about seeing how I can contribute to MS in the Black community specifically, whether it be just the one-on-one patient care, research, community outreach, whatever I can do. That's what I really want to dedicate my career to.
Awesome. Well, we are so excited for you to join the fold. And you're finishing up your fellowship this year. Is that correct?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Awesome sauce. Okay, let's go to Dawn. We'll go to Dawn and then we'll go to Damien. So tell us a little bit about how you became a part of the MS community.
I was diagnosed on May 23rd, 2000. I started my journey just pretty much in denial. I really wasn't accepting the fact that I had MS because everyone looked at me and said, "Oh, but you look so good." And so I felt this disease it's invisible, so I can hide for quite some time, which is probably what I did for over a decade. And when my disease started to progress, I decided something has shifted in my life and I need to make a change. And I started started in the patient advocacy world, started going to different MS society functions, speaking to small groups of women who have multiple sclerosis, young women in particular, young women like myself, because I was diagnosed when I was 25. And I realized that I had a strong passion and I absolutely loved it. I haven't looked back since. I have started a podcast. I started a podcast in 2018, and we touched on so many different topics. And Dr. Williams, you were a guest several times.
I was.
And I'm so grateful for that. But MS really touched every aspect of my life, not only my personal life, but the people who surrounded me, my caregivers or my support group, my family. It wasn't just an illness for Dawn. And I felt that I had to use my voice. I had to use my platform. I had to reach out to the community, the MS community in particular, and people who wanted to know more about MS, wanted to know what's really happening to you, what's going on. I see you walking with a cane some days. I see you, not really feeling well some days. So what is it about? And I felt it was my duty to really take a dive and come into the world of MS. And I've stayed put. And well, I don't think MS is going anywhere either. So it's been my roommate. and here I am.
Awesome. And what about you, Damien?
Peace, y'all. I'm an actor from New York and living in Los Angeles, trying to be on TV longer than 30 seconds. Done about 40 commercials for people like Realtor.com with Elizabeth Banks and Ring, the home security system with Shaquille O'Neal. So I sell you products on the TV all day, every day. And as I'm working to be in Hollywood and expand my career, I'm just noticing like fatigue is bad. I can't check my blind spot when I'm driving. And my wife, someone who I've been with since college, and now it's over 20 years. At the time, it was 16, 17 years. She's like, "Yo, bro, my man, something wrong with you." And she doesn't speak that way at all. But she's like, yo, I've been here for a lot of years, Damien, and something's wrong with you. Let's figure this out. And as we went through the circuitous journey of doctor to doctor, we figure out that the thing that's wrong with me is multiple sclerosis. And I already had a YouTube channel because, like I say, that's my job, and nobody watched my videos. But whenever I went to the infusion center or did things related to MS, thousands of people would watch. So, as the requisite performer, I turned a corner and began making exclusively MS content. And now there are over 6,000 people who watch me every week talk about MS, and I help people with MS feel seen, heard, and understood.
Awesome. Okay, so tell us a little bit about, so we're talking about MS in the Black population. So, tell us a little bit about what you felt like was unique to your experience as a Black person, either going through the diagnosis process or once you got diagnosed, looking at different materials and going to different programs. What do you feel like was unique or maybe even missing in your diagnosis experience? Start with Damien.
Yeah, I'm like, bro, y'all, Damien Washington will fill a gap. So you will always be speaking. One more time, Dr. Lee?
Yeah. So a little bit about what about your experience do you feel like was unique as a Black person living with MS, or for you, a Black man, right? Because you are usually represented even smaller percentage of those with MS. Right. Maybe things that you've heard as you've talked to other people throughout the community, or things that you identified, as you were just going through the process.
Right. There was not a lot of folk to look toward when I had my diagnosis as far as Black males. The only ones I saw were Richard Pryor and Montel, and it didn't really end well for Richard Pryor. And Montel's cool and everything, like he's great, but I do know he's going through a lot to just even show up. So knowing that those are my two North Stars, so to speak, was like, there really is nobody else around here that I can look to and be like, hey, I look like him. We have families from the same town, like et cetera, et cetera. Right. So that, I think that was the most challenging thing as I try to figure out why my immune system is eating my brain and my spine, and never mind why, just mitigate how it goes through that meal, so to speak.
A meal. Okay. That's the first time I've heard a meal analogy. Okay. So definitely not seeing, people who look like you, out talking about MS. That's something I very commonly hear from a lot of my patients. What about, did you know anybody with MS? Like, had you heard of MS before you were diagnosed?
Again, Montel and Richard Pryor were the only paradigms that I've had for multiple sclerosis. And then once I sort of was like, all right, cool, no, I get this thing. Well, ain't that a white lady disease? So things like that were the things that popped in my head. And after a while, it's like, bro, regardless, this is your medical diagnosis, and you've been to 6 doctors. You've read the report. Now what?
Right. Okay. What about you, Dawn?
I think I went initially to an MS support group meeting, and like Damien said, I had initially thought, wow, I thought this was a Caucasian woman disease. So yeah, this is working here. Okay. And there were a few brown faces in there, but there wasn't enough representation, I should say. And I remember someone asking me if I wanted to speak at an event, a MS event for women, and it was mainly for African-American women. And I felt like, okay, this is my time to really see what this community is all about and where do we fit in this space. And the doctor said something earlier about connection, and I wanted to be able to make that connection because I felt isolated. Initially, when I was diagnosed, I only saw lighter faces than myself, and I didn't feel that connection. I didn't feel that I was even seen. I didn't feel that I was even heard. I remember my very first neurologist experience, wonderful neurologist. I just don't believe that he wanted to hear what I had to say or listen. and he took more of a back seat in terms of treatment and being proactive in my care. And so I always wondered in the back of my mind, was that because I'm Black? I don't know. I could never understand. And so my, I suppose, first connection was just seeing the one or two brown faces in those support group meetings personally. And then on television, like Damien did say, I knew Richard Pryor, I knew Montel, but I still didn't see any Black women or African American women. I believe there was a woman, Annette Funicello. I believe she had MS.
From the
Yeah,
Mickey Mouse Club.
Yes, but she's an Italian woman. So
Yeah, I
but
was
that
like, I don't think Annette was Black.
no, right,
Okay.
right. But
I was like,
my connection was woman. You know
right,
what I mean?
right.
White woman still, and there was no one who looked like me. And
Mhm.
like I said, just those one or two brown faces in those first, meetings, and I thought, okay, this could work, but I'm not sure. And that's pretty much where my passion came from, because I said,
Mhm.
there has to be more. There has to be more women out here who look like me, who want to share the same experiences or similar experiences and talk about all the things that we're going through. Are you listened to? Are you able to speak your mind when you're in a doctor's appointment, or are they, just kind of pushing you to the side and rushing you through this appointment?
Yeah, so there's so many things that come to my mind, as I hear you guys speak. And, certainly there has traditionally been a lack of representation or diversity in the images that we see related to MS. And one of the reasons I became passionate about research in the Black and African American community is I live in Atlanta, which, sometimes I call Wakanda for short. But I live in Atlanta, and, I had, through my training, learned that MS was a disease that primarily affected young white women. But when I looked in my lobby, like 50% of the people I saw were Black, if not more, sometimes 70 or 80%. And so I'm scratching my head like, okay, well, you say it's a young white women's disease, but everybody I see is Black, and then we begin to look at research like outcomes and see that there are some disparities or health disparities there. And I'm like, okay, somebody's got to really focus on that. And so there were people focusing on it, but that is what drove me to really get involved with the research aspect, because what I was seeing in real life wasn't matching what I learned when I was coming along through training. What are your thoughts about it, Dr. Akinsanya?
Yeah, that's a great point, that for a long time, MS has been almost marketed as a white woman's disease, because there have been studies that show that there's a higher prevalence, or more likely to see the disease further away from the equator, like people with European ancestry. So, for a long time, that's the data we had and that's what we knew. But the issue was, in the United States, we didn't have data to show the race and ethnicity breakdown for MS. So we're going based off worldwide data that was not necessarily accurate for us in the US. So I believe that is part of the story of why there's been such an under recognition of MS in the Black community. And it's really unfortunate when I hear stories like yours, Dawn, where it sounds like, maybe people were not even considering the disease, and you were, or maybe not taking it as seriously. And I hear that more often than I would like. And again, I think at least part of it is because we had been assuming this worldwide data was accurate for the US. But more recently, we found that MS is we see new cases most frequently in African American women, and total cases are probably at the very least equal between African American women and white women, which is completely opposite of what we've been going based off of all of this time. So it's important for us to know, this data and know these numbers so that we can educate not only the general community, but also the medical community. Because if doctors are not recognizing that MS is common in African Americans, then they're more likely to not diagnose it and to assume, oh, these symptoms are from something else because, MS doesn't show up in Black people. So it's got to be from something else.
Absolutely. So, I agree with everything that's been said. I think the key is that people do have to recognize that MS does occur in the Black community. Doctors, as well as Black people, right? Sometimes we may wait to the last minute to go to the doctor. Sometimes we may have to have another person tell us there's something going on where we need to go to the doctor, even though we know something's wrong. I ain't pointing no fingers, no shade. But still, a lot of times we blow things off, right? And if the community is not aware of MS, then when someone has numbness and tingling, or other symptoms, they may not go and seek medical care for that, particularly because early on, the symptoms may go away. I can't say how many people I've had come in that said once they got diagnosed, they were like, you know what? 5 years ago, my leg went numb for 2 weeks and I thought it was a pinched nerve. And I'm like, but you were 10 and you had no problems. Like, why would your nerve be pinching you? I'm exaggerating. But the point is, we have to be aware and we have to seek that care, because the earlier people are diagnosed and treated, the better off people do over time. So let's talk a little bit about some of the data. And you kind of touched on it, Dr. Akinsanya. But, there are some studies that suggest that the outcomes may be worse in Black and African Americans with MS, like with many other diseases. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, unfortunately, the data that we've seen says a lot of worse. Name the category, and more likely than not, the data is showing that things are worse. Black patients with MS have been found to have a shorter time between relapses. So, basically more frequent relapses than white patients. They've also been seen to have more aggressive disease up front. So, in the beginning of their disease course, the disease tends to be more aggressive. They've been found to have more disability than white patients, and also higher rates of mortality, meaning that they're dying earlier than white patients with MS. And then when you look at different specific clinical outcomes like cognition, the way people are able to think and process things, that has shown to be worse. Things with the optic nerve, which helps with your vision, that has shown to be worse in Black patients. Walking ability has shown to be worse. I wish I could say there was a category that was, not so morbid, but basically from what we've seen almost across the board, things tend to be worse in Black patients than when compared to white patients.
And I think, part of the, hope that we see now is that there's a lot of focus on diversity in clinical trials. I know Damien has done some work talking about clinical research. I'm sure you may have as well, Dawn. But there's a focus on trying to understand because it may not just be a biologic difference. It may be all those other things that lead to our care, whether it is, where you live. Do you have access to a neurologist? Do you even have access to an MS specialist? Do you have access to the hospital to get care? Transportation to get to and from doctor's appointments. Some places are deserts where they don't have MS specialists anywhere close by. And then you have places like Atlanta where we have 5 MS specialty clinics, in one city, so there are a lot of factors that lead to outcomes and care. And I think that many of us in the scientific community are really trying to understand what's causing these differences in outcomes. Are there things that you all, Damien and Dawn, have heard frequently in the MS community, the patient community, issues that people have that may lead to worse outcomes, like they lose their insurance or they can't get to the doctor or they don't have access to a specialist, any things like that?
I'm always leave room for you, Dawn. Go ahead.
I've heard patients speak about their team of doctors not being sensitive to their needs. And there are a number of factors that enter someone's life and their health care. Basically, they come into you talking about, my foot has gone numb and my hands are tingling, and I can't forget what I ate yesterday, and I can't forget what I put on, this morning. And doctors are not sensitive to the fact that, yes, you have MS, but yes, you may also be going through a terrible breakup or mourning the loss of a pet or a loved one. And so what I've spoken to a number of people and patients about, particularly African American patients, is there isn't a sensitivity level there, and they never feel as if someone is really, really taking the time to listen to what they need. Their needs are not, all of their needs are not being met. I shouldn't say some needs are, but not the whole picture, not the whole person.
Yeah. And that goes a lot to, shared decision making, making sure that we're sitting down and talking about, what are your goals as a person living with MS? What are realistic things that we can try to work on, things that we can meet? Obviously, we can't fix all things, but there are many things that, approaches with wellness can really help. I counsel people a lot on diet, exercise, yoga, meditation, stress reduction, all the things, right? Because we know that, the medications play a part, but they don't do the whole part of treating your MS. There are things that you do, and there are things that you can do to help yourself. What do you think about that, Damien?
That's one of the toughest things to reckon with when you get an MS diagnosis, because you catch the flu, you get the flu shot, you fine. You catch whatever thing, you go to the doctor and get the remedy to that, and then that's it. And then you get MS, and so you're like, so you got MS. Well, there's this diet, there's a whole set of not options, but just ways that you can begin to invite wellness in to your own body, and that's going to be different for everyone.
Absolutely.
Just like the multiple sclerosis is going to be different for everyone, and that's what really kind of makes it difficult to even get down to one thing, because everybody is so different, and what works super well for someone might not move the needle as much for another. So all of those differences really contribute to making a complex way forward. You just want to be able to take the pill and be like, no more MS, or my MS is less. And it's like, well, it doesn't exactly work that way. You have to take the pill and you have MS less, but what you eating? But how often are you sleeping? But are you stressing out? Like, et cetera, et cetera. That it's all part of the medical condition picture.
Absolutely. And so let's talk a little bit. So we talked about some elements of this, but let's talk a little bit about self-advocacy, because I think this is really important, particularly for our community. We talk about, a lot of times people go to the doctor and they think they're just supposed to do what the doctor says, or they go home and they know they can't do it and they nod their head like they're going to do it. And then we have bad outcomes. So how do people really begin to advocate for themselves when going through these doctor's visits? I hear Victoria Reese talk a lot about becoming a professional patient, right? You go from a young healthy person that goes to the doctor once every blue moon to having all these regular visits and seeing specialists, and you might see therapists and all these. How do you advocate for yourself in the midst of all of this going on, and in the healthcare system?
Trust.
That's you. I told you that was for you, dog. Come on now.
I think trust, because it can go both ways. You have to trust yourself that you are aware of what's happening in your body, and that you're able to communicate what's happening in your body to your doctor. And I think it's also important to build that trust and to understand that this healthcare provider is here to assist you 90% of the time, I would say, or 99% of the time. And they're not there to take anything away from you. They're trying to add to your life, help you have a better quality of life. And I feel that you go in armed with confidence and your notebook and your pen and your paper, and you go in and you say, okay, I trust that there will be a good outcome from this session or from this appointment, and I'm going to get my questions answered. And if I don't, I'm going to ask where I can find resources so that I can get those questions answered. And if I don't get them answered there, I will find someone else or continue to work hard and try to locate all of the things that I need and make sure that I am a complete whole patient at the end of the day or end of my week. And I think by advocating for yourself, you become this empowered patient. And I think that's a part of what doctors should understand too, that you're kind of empowering us as well, trying to empower us.
Yeah, I think empowerment is so important, right? It is one of the key messages I try to get across to my patients. And you use two of my favorite words, pen and paper. Okay. Now, if that for you means a voice memo, smartphone notes, however that's translated, preparing is extremely important because we have a limited amount of time, and it's very difficult to help if the first time you thought about your problem is when you sitting there with me and I'm like, well, where is it hurt? You're like, oh, I don't know. And I'm like, well, when does it hurt? How often does it hurt? How bad does it hurt? So thinking about what's going on. I mean, obviously, we don't want you dwelling on every problem with your body, but before you get ready for that visit, think about the things that you've been dealing with. Think about, what questions you have or what priorities you want to set. We may not get them all done in one visit, but it is helpful if we know what's going on, because one of my favorite quotes is at the bottom of my email. It says, the man who conceals his disease can never be cured, right? So if we don't know there's a problem, then it's going to be very difficult for us to fix it. And it's also, as a doctor, one of my pet peeves is I'm walking out the door, I got my hand on the door, and it's like, hey, Dr. Williams, one more thing. And then it's something that like we need to talk about for an hour. And I'm like, well, we could have spent the last hour talking about this, So, that preparation is extremely important. And also bring somebody with you, right? Sometimes, that family member, that care partner can be that person that helps provide the story or helps take some of that burden off of you. They can remember or they can write so that you can engage. And sometimes that person is there in person. Sometimes we FaceTime that person. Sometimes they're on speakerphone. There are different things that we can do to try to help, but we need to know, as a doctor, my mind reading skills are not very good, so we can't help unless we know what we need to help with.
I'm going to hop in on that one, Dr.
Go ahead.
Because it is incredibly important to have another person in the mix who is not yourself. Because luckily enough, I'm someone who's pretty much always had another person right there and able to call me out or able to speak to the doctor in a way in which I cannot see, or I'm too in my feelings enough to see and to say and to articulate. And that other person does care about you or me, and they want the best health outcome. And having someone outside of yourself in on your appointments to help facilitate that conversation, it's paramount. Because if it's just on you to be like, well, so how's your MS? Well, it's okay. Well, how's your diet? Well, it's okay. That song is going to often play unless you have something else outside of you to help shift that. And often it's the other person, the partner, the spouse, etc.
And it's almost like a reflex, right? Somebody says, how you doing? You like, fine. And
I'm fine.
Okay. I'm like, well, you don't look fine, and so that's important, right? And so it may not be somebody that's there every visit, but periodically, again, those people that are around you can sometimes see things that you may not be able to recognize. Like if your memory is not that good, you won't remember that you asked them that same question 10 times, but they'll remember that, so all of those things can really help give us a picture of if we're still going in the right direction or if we need to switch gears and come up with a new plan. What are your thoughts about that, about patient empowerment and self-advocacy, Dr. Akinsanya?
Yeah, I loved all the pointers that you all shared. It's super important for patients to be able to advocate for themselves. And I also just want to put out there, as physicians, we want you to advocate for yourselves, and we want to be part of, your team as, your journey to health and wellness. It's not that, we're on two opposite ends of the spectrum and you want to be well and we're trying to combat that. But by you advocating for yourself, we can be better support systems as physicians, and helping to provide guidance for your healthcare. And I totally agree that coming with preparing, okay, what's been going on, and I noticed a couple weeks ago that my right leg I was tripping over it more, and coming prepared with that helps the office visit be more efficient, because like you said, Dr. Williams, it is a set period of time. Unfortunately, we can't just sit there for 2 hours most of the time and talk. We have a distinct period of time. So that's how we can be efficient and be more poignant, and determine, okay, what's most important and needs to be addressed today. And if it's more than what's the allotted time can have capacity for, we can talk about the other things in a separate visit. And I would say that patients shouldn't feel shy or that they're bothering their doctors or, being any type of nuisance. Like, we want to hear what's been going on. We want you to advocate. Please bring your family members. I love that. Actually, it makes for usually a better visit, honestly, when there's someone there who can provide a different perspective, for all the reasons that you all already mentioned. So never feel like, oh, well, I don't want them to think XYZ. We don't think that, whatever you can do to enhance your health, we are on board with that. And that's what we want to support.
The doctor's a nerd. Dr. Williams is the nerdy neurologist.
Absolutely.
And as I call myself a nerd, I built my first computer when I was 15. And I cannot tell you how vast my digital knowledge is. So I use the word nerd affectionately because that's in me as well.
That's a great
the doctor's
word.
a giant nerd, and all the nerd wants to do is talk about the thing that it's nerdy about and really help move the needle
Right.
with other people, and hopefully that their insight can aid in that. They want to do this, so there is no sort of, oh, maybe I shouldn't do it. Like, I get it because I've been there, but I do also know that the best outcomes come when you just be like, hey doc, hey, okay, cool, and just really speak about it.
Right. Because, again, there are things that we can do to help, and don't be shy. You would be surprised. There is probably nothing that I have not heard. Nothing. The bowels, the bladder, the sex, the everything. So don't be shy if something is affecting your daily life. There are often things that we can do, but if you don't have a team that you trust, then you're not able to really talk about and express those things. It's really key to have a healthcare team, that is built upon trusting relationships with your doctor, with your nurses, with the other members of the team. So we can really help you. We can get down to the nitty gritty, as my mama like to say, the nitty gritty. Were you going to say something, Dawn?
Yeah, I was just going to say MS made me nerd out, and I never considered myself a nerd, but when I saw my first MRI, I was like, oh, my brain is kind of looking like a Christmas tree. I want to know, okay, so what part is that affecting? Oh, that's T6 or T2 or T whatever, or C5. I'm sorry if I'm saying it all wrong, but I have lesions from like C5 to T12 or something like that. So I was like, oh, so the thoracic controls my gait and my bowels and bladder. Okay. I mean, I completely just went nerd crazy, and it was so beneficial for me. That may not be for everyone. However, I do suggest, like you said, take a pen and paper and learn the vocabulary. That will help you tremendously. If you don't know what myelin is and you're in there with Dr. Williams or Dr. Akinsama, I'm sorry if I said your name wrong, but it makes it a difficult time in your appointment, because you need to understand what myelin is. You need to understand where your prefrontal cortex is. I mean, you don't have to know every little detail, but you need to know what an MRI is, or with or without contrast. Those are important.
Absolutely. Doing your homework. And it's a lifelong learning experience. You learn about MS. There's more and more that we're learning all the time. I've got a conference I'm going to in a couple of weeks, and hopefully I'll come out smarter than I was before I got there, but you're also learning about your own body for the rest of your life, right? As things change, as you mature or get older, there's aging in addition to MS. And so we're all learning. And so it's a learning process the whole time. And so it's extremely important to recognize that we'll all be learning together throughout the whole journey. So, two more things that I want to talk about before we close. I would love for Damien and Dawn to tell us how you became comfortable with sharing your story and talking about your diagnosis. I do encounter a lot of my patients, some of whom are a part of the Black community. Is like, you keep your business in your house. What goes on in your house stays in your house. We don't talk about this. We don't talk about that. And of course, everyone's decision whether or not to disclose their diagnosis is their own individual decision, right? But for those that maybe want to share but don't know how to get out there and how to share, what kind of gave you that courage to share your story with others and to be a vocal advocate for the MS community?
For me, it happened accidentally. Like I say, it's my career to be on camera and do things on camera. So part of that was starting a YouTube channel. And I mean, there's months of videos where nobody was watching at all. But because I'm a seasoned performer, I was not really paying attention to that. It was more of the work of making the videos and doing this new thing and being focused on that. And then the people then the videos about my multiple sclerosis were the ones that got thousands of views unexpectedly. And I'm like, I only took my camera to the infusion center because I was taking my camera everywhere. I took my camera to get my hair cut. I took my you know what I'm saying? So I didn't see that for myself outside of myself. However, once it sort of clicked that this is not a void, but this is a space that I can fill out with just speaking to the camera and talking about what's going on with me. That's something that I kind of really didn't get until I got it. And then once I got it, oh man, that's what the heck I do. So it's just one of those things that you have to really sort of find your own way, because just like you have the MS, you have to figure out how you are going to light the fire under you to expand your understanding of it and expand your reach in the community. Because this is one of these things where you don't want to be in this club. However, there's some really nice people in the club. Like Dawn's in the club, Dr. Williams in the club. I'm sitting here talking to you right now because I'm in the club. Like all of these sorts of things that you cannot currently see because you are still hurting, and that's fine. However, there is going to be something that's going to get you to share that hurt, and as you do that, you will help someone else who cannot share that hurt and who cannot see how. And it's imperative that you understand that there's power in just speaking and just talking. And even if you don't think you're talking about the right thing, or you could talk about it better, or no, whatever, just talk.
Right.
And your people will find you.
That's it. And what about you, Dawn?
I was going through an exacerbation, and I was getting, treatment. And I'm sitting there just flipping through a magazine, and I wasn't feeling myself. And I remember saying, I have to keep going. I have to keep going. And I had a magazine and had a book. And I don't know what made me put the two down, but I went to my phone. And I was flipping, and I saw something about Dr. Martin Luther King. And forgive me because I don't know it by heart, because my cognition, I don't remember everything, but I'll read it to you. But this is what helped me and made me jump in head first, honestly. Head first.
No pun intended.
No
or all the puns intended.
And you all may know this quote, but Dr. King said, if you can't fly, then run. If you can't run, then walk. If you can't walk, then crawl. But whatever you do, you have to keep moving forward. And that resonated with me so deeply. And I said, this is not the end. You have to keep going and you have to make connections. And there are other people who I'm sure are feeling the same exact way that you are. You're sitting here, on the East Coast. I'm sure there's someone down south or on the West Coast that's going through the same thing. What are you going to do to motivate not only yourself, but how are you going to motivate others to keep going? And that stuck with me, and it still sticks with me to this day. And that is what pretty much changed my trajectory and why I'm here and why
I love it.
love what I do.
I love it because everyone has a unique voice, and there are people who are waiting for you to share your story. There are people who will be touched by what you say. And so to me, there's room for everybody, but it's such an amazing thing to see people really share their stories and share their voices, and how many people are like, oh my God, and I certainly direct, many of my patients to resources like you guys, podcasts and shows, so that they can see people that look like them. And they come back like, man, I'm so glad you told me. I didn't even know that there were people out there.
We out here, man. Come on, let's go.
All right. So last thing, everybody let's do a quick round robin. Advice you would give to a newly diagnosed person, and tell us where to find you if you're on social media. We'll start with Dr. Akinsanya.
Yeah, I would definitely advise a newly diagnosed person, if they weren't already seeing an MS specialist, to make sure they're seeing a specialist if they have access to one, not just a general neurologist, because that will increase the quality of your care. So that's very important. And the second thing is to make sure that you're plugged into resources and support through, whether it be like podcasts, like Dr. Williams mentioned, there's MS societies that you can get plugged into, but you don't have to navigate this by yourself, even outside the doctor's office. So make sure you get plugged in with other people, resources, like Dawn mentioned, learning the lingo. So really learning for yourself and educating yourself.
Awesome. Dawn?
Gosh. Speak up for yourself, number one. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Ask. And if you don't understand, ask again. And if you didn't get the answer that you needed, ask again. And give yourself grace, because this is not easy. Having multiple sclerosis is not easy. And I don't know how to sugarcoat that, but I think giving yourself grace, being prepared, as you said, Dr. Williams, and arming yourself with the right knowledge, the right vocabulary, and just be strong.
Awesome. And how do people find you, find your podcast, or find you on social media?
I am on Instagram at the Unquiet Mind Podcast. You can also go to the unquietmindpodcast.com. You can also find me on Instagram at Dawn_Janine, and the same on Facebook.
Awesome. Damien, word of advice and where to find you.
Well, Dawn took mine. It's grace. And the idea of inviting grace in when you are not really having such a good time. That habit, you're not going to see how to do it. However, once you sort of get it in your body, man, the grace's floodgates will open, and you will begin to have different options and different outcomes. And it's difficult. Yeah. But the grace is there to be like, all right, well, no, I'm not cooking tonight, or no, I'm not going to do that, or no, I'm going to go, but I'm going to leave in a half hour, et cetera, to help you fill your own cup up. And you have to fill your cup up first and foremost, because it's got a lot of holes in the cup. So your water's leaking, baby. So you're going to have to figure out a way to continually fill yourself up. And grace is a large part of that.
Awesome.
My YouTube channel, youtube.com/no stress MS. No stress MS, baby.
Awesome. Well, listen, we have had an amazing conversation. I feel like I need to pass the offering bucket or the offering plate or whatever. But I thank you guys.
Around. Come on. Put something in the hat, y'all.
So much. Just for your words of wisdom and for just being so candid and honest and open. And I know that a lot of people will be helped by this information. Thank you, everyone, for tuning into Brain Chat. We will see you in 2 weeks. Same bat time, same bat channel. Good night, everybody.